So, welcome everybody to the very first Institute of Conflict Management Roundtable meeting, where we're going to be discussing some of the main elements around the Institute itself, but also touching on a few important topics over the coming months. And hopefully, these are going to be a monthly event that you guys can listen to, but hopefully engage with as well. And after listening to it, we'd really appreciate any feedback, any comments, and conversation that you could have around this. But we thought the first one that we'd ever do is pulling just a few of the board onto the meeting to have a chat about where the ICM started, its history and its journey. So starting off, I'll just introduce myself. For many of you don't know me, it's Andy Baker. I run a training company called Able Training Support Limited, and we specialise predominantly in the health and social care sector around behaviour management and restraint. Also joining me is Gerard. So Gerard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, thanks Andy. It's Gerard O'Dea here. I run a training company in the sector also. We specialize, I suppose, in helping schools with different kinds of behavior that they might run into, behaviors of concern. And we help staff with conflict management and de-escalation, and then the more protective physical interventions that staff may have to use to keep everybody safe at school. So that's me.
Fantastic. And I almost feel like we're got a guest of honor as well as the the original, the God, as far as the ICM's concerned. So also joining us is Phil Hardy.
Yeah, hi, Phil Hardy. I'm responsible for incorporating the Institute back in 1998. I too run a training organisation which was founded in 1995. We work in health and social care, education. Airlines is a particular niche marketplace that we work in, but basically helping staff manage the risks of challenging and other hazardous behaviours in the workplace.
Okay, perfect. So we said sort of guest of honour, Phil. So obviously, the ICM was partly your brainchild as far as how it first started. So starting off, why did you do this to yourself, mate?
Okay, well, back in the early mid '90s, when I first contemplated leaving regular employment and regular income in search of a career on my own as a trainer in this field, we were looking for somewhere to, as a company, we were looking for somewhere that we could hang a hat, if you like, an organisation that would give some credibility and an accreditation to the training that we delivered. And at the time, there wasn't much about. There was still the myth back in the early '90s, sorry, that trainers in restraint, in particular, had to be Home Office approved, which from the very onset was nonsense. The Home Office had an approved system, providing you worked for and within the Home Office and delivered that recognised system, then that was fine. But the myth existed that if you were a Home Office approved control and restraint instructor, then you had some sort of credibility. But as I say, it was complete fiction. It kept me in work for a while, but and I certainly used that myth to my advantage. But we decided as an organisation whether we should look for something else, an organisation that would give credibility to the training that we were designing. And so we looked around, and there wasn't much available. The British Institute of Learning Disabilities had put together a membership scheme for delivering physical interventions training, which they were trying to get recognition for with certain government departments, the DFEE as it was back then, and the Department for Health. They were courting their support at the time. But we went down for a meeting at the headquarters, and me and my business partner at the time, and found it hard work. They obviously didn't want members other than the people they wanted to work with, which we found rather annoying. So on his return journey, we decided we would look to see if there was anything else we could do to create a body that training organisations like us could operate under and help set standards for training in this particular field. So we Googled the Institute of Conflict Management, as conflict management was a sort of buzzword back then. And it didn't. The one hadn't been incorporated, so we took the liberty of incorporating the name there and then. Not quite sure what we were going to do with it, but we did that, and then we decided that in the interest of transparency, we couldn't run it as a security care organisation. That would just alienate our competitors. And the whole idea was to get our competitors involved in developing a body that we could all contribute to. So we found an independent secretariat based in Leicester, Associate Action Enterprises, who agreed to organise an inaugural meeting at Leicester City Football Club in the Gary Lineker Lounge. And we managed to attract 67 training organisations to the inaugural meeting, which was a bit of a coup, and basically got a resounding thumbs up from almost everybody in the audience, with the caveat that there was some work to do, which we all agreed that this was just a concept at that moment in time. But if everybody was happy with the concept of a national body to set standards in the prevention and management of work-related violence, then we would go ahead and fully incorporate the institute, engage the secretariat, and begin that process. So in order to officially be called an institute, we needed a letter of support from a government department. So we decided, as we've already been speaking to the Health and Safety Executive about this need for standards in this area, that we would approach the HSE and see if we could get their letter of support to help us incorporate as an institute. They were very keen, actually, because it had only recently been included in the Health and Safety at Work Act. In 1996, it became part of the Health and Safety at Work Act, the management of work-related violence. So we were about 2 years into that legislation being added to the Health and Safety at Work Act. So they liked the idea and could see the need for standards in this particular area. So it took 2 years to get the letter of support from the Health and Safety Executive, but once we had that, we were able to incorporate as the Institute of Conflict Management. And then very quickly, the HSE decided they would provide the funding for the development of national occupational standards for the prevention and management of work-related violence, which are still in print today, although they've been through a couple of reviews.
Question at that point. So you got 67 organizations together, training companies, and also were they internal training teams, or were they mostly sort of commercial training providers?
There were a lot of independent training organisations that had started up round about that period in the mid 90s. There were also some pretty big players. There was Studio 3 were there, Team Teach, who had been around for a few years by then, and then a whole lot of independent commercial training organisations like Security Care and others.
And so the idea was to create a standards body and a membership organization to represent the sector, I suppose, that's training and conflict management and the various topics along with it. But there must have been great demand. That's what I'm thinking, just as you tell your story, to get that number of training companies together in one place on one day.
There was nowhere you could go to get a rubber stamp for what you were doing. Should we just pause for a second? Because Trevor just had to take a call. Okay, the other thing was that as a group of training providers, as a national group of training providers, it was much easier to get a seat at the table with the government departments. Individually, we could never have done that. Individually, none of the training organisations could have got a seat at the table when the Department of Health wanted to discuss where they were going with training in this area. So, but by operating under that institute umbrella, we were able to get involved in working with government departments that were looking at standards in this particular area. As I say, the HSE commissioned the ICM to chair the development group for the development of the National Occupational Standards for the prevention and management of work-related violence. Shortly afterwards, the NHS, if I can get the title right, the Counter Fraud Security Management Service, the CFSMS, they were developing a national programme for conflict resolution, in the NHS. A program that at the time was mandated to be rolled out to all frontline members of staff, which in itself created some problems because nobody had the budget to pay for it. They'd already begun this development work when we asked for a seat at the table and to be able to get involved in that process. And it became apparent very quickly that their group of experts that they put together were mainly ex-police officers who have a certain way of dealing with conflict that doesn't always transfer into other settings that readily. So we were able to have some input into the development of that national programme for conflict resolution. And then on the back of that, the NHS realised it would never have the budget to train all frontline members of staff.
Yeah.
So they went down the route of developing an online training programme, and the ICM were the special materials expert for the development of that material.
Right.
So the ICM very quickly found itself a place on the stage. We went on to be involved in the development of the SIA door supervisors program, which is another story. The original development did include 2 days physical skills, but nobody had bothered to do any consultation on the physical skill set. So the proposed physical skill set certainly suited some training organisations involved in the discussions, but not all training organisations involved in those discussions. And to this day, the ICM still has a physical skills syllabus, which is recognised by the awarding bodies that deliver the SIA awards. So, we've had some limited success over the years.
Yeah. Sounds very much so in some ways. As obviously that strange transitional period, obviously starting off with the change in regulations and bringing workplace violence actually into the kind of forefront of the health and safety executive, but obviously then the SIA coming in as well and kind of being around in that particular time was big.
Well, my bit when we first started back in 1994, 95, my business partner at the time, who had no background in this particular area, but used to do the introductions on the courses and things. He often used to say that it was a health and safety issue, that you put that there was a health and safety issue around the management of work-related violence, and therefore it was in your interest to put training in place to train your staff because it would mitigate any investigation by the health and safety executive. And I used to say to him after training, I said, Andrew, you're going a little bit off piece here with this because the HSE don't actually recognise it as a risk. And his argument always was, well, they should recognise it as an identifiable risk. And sure enough, 2 years later they did. So it was, it's proved to be right on that one.
Moment, isn't it, to think about, Andy, because you and I sort of started in our careers a little bit later on. But I know my training in this area, originally as a trainer, focused really heavily on the health and safety aspects of work-related violence. Probably yours did too. But I think in more recent years, we've seen a drift towards the ministries themselves. So, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education. I feel like taking that under their own umbrella, taking it under their own control, even though ultimately many of these incidents will arrive into a courtroom under a health and safety breach. We've got hundreds of pages of guidance from the Department of Health and the NHS, and we've got, I can say happily at the moment, the Department of Education guidance is quite succinct, but it seems that those departments are taking more and more of an interest in workplace violence, even though it remains most likely a health and safety issue at heart. I don't know
Yeah.
what you think about that, but I think that's a development over time that we've probably seen. If you consider what Phil just said about the HSE recognizing workplace violence, I think it's reaching even further now into other ministries, other departments in government.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it was just there was always an assumption, I suppose, and very much the same school as yourself when I've been kind of trained in it, developing it was all around that health and safety side of things. But there's definitely a move away from that being the main focus. But as you said, it's what it predominantly comes down to, as far as the well-being of employees or those affected by their undertakings. That's it, isn't it? It's kind of the most basic foundation of what workplace violence comes to. But there's all these kind of extra fluffy bits that have been added on that feel maybe a bit superfluous. So they weren't necessarily needed as much as. I mean, obviously, I know the Health and Safety Executive has expanded to include kind of psychological well-being more so than they ever have before. We're still then, even with the additional stuff around trauma-informed and everything like that, still coming back to health and safety and well-being. If it's a workplace, it doesn't matter what that workplace is. It still comes down to the same principles. If workplace violence is causing stress, causing trauma, causing impact, still covered by Health and Safety Executive remit, as far as I'm concerned. So why do you think they've moved away from that, Phil, and from obviously seeing the full journey? Why do you think that's happened?
I think every sector, and probably quite rightly, wants to sectorize the training. I said earlier that training doesn't readily transfer from one sector to another. And the training requirement in certain sectors can be greatly different, and I think that's why, as I say, probably a good thing that sectors take some ownership of it. As I say, the HSE still has today a partnership on work-related violence, which includes the unions, various other interested parties, MPs. The ICM did actually chair an all-party parliamentary group at one stage on work-related violence, but that seemed to transfer to the HSE's partnership on work-related violence when we had to dissolve the all-party parliamentary group, which you have to get so many MPs interested for it to maintain its journey for an all-party parliamentary group, and they decided to transfer it back to the HSE, which is really, if there's a serious injury at work as a result of work-related violence, then ultimately it will be the HSE that investigates it.
So what do you think? Obviously, there is other organisations that have positioned themselves as kind of bodies within this, especially around the NHS and things like that. So although there is push from others, I mean, all of us, I think, we know how we feel about this, but where do you think is the ICM's kind of place within this kind of moving forwards? Is it still going back to those same foundations, or are we having to shift our focus around those the different needs of the different sectors?
I think the National Occupational Standards provide a real good foundation for any sector looking to develop guidance or codes of practice or training in this particular area. But as I say, sectorising that material is a definite plus, providing you get the right working group to put that together. And I suppose the ICM's strength and weaknesses that were across sector. So in some ways that's a positive and a strength, because we're able to take points of view from different sectors and share that information. But in the same breath, sometimes we're looked upon as too generic by some of the sectors, I think. Although we do have expertise in all sectors within the ICM, and we have previously and still today have sector-specific development groups. We mentioned earlier the SIA physical intervention syllabus for the private security sector that's recognised by the awarding bodies that are delivering those awards, and that syllabus was developed by ICM members who worked in security and delivered training in security to security guards, to door supervisors, stewards at sporting events or concerts and such like. You know, and I think the reason that the ICM syllabus for the SIA is so popular with its membership is it's not a brand skill set from a commercial training organisation. It's an independently developed set of skills that was put together by a peer group from the security sector who all decided on what that syllabus should contain for that job role. And I think that's certainly something going forward when we look to the future of the ICM. There are certainly other sectors that would benefit from that kind of development.
I guess that's a really key point, isn't it? Is that when you develop sector standards, training requirements for a certain job role, you really do need input from a broad spectrum of people, very much including the people who do that job. It's so important, isn't it? Because so much can be missed in the nuances of the frontline at the coal face experience of doing the work, whether that's in care support, Andy, or as a teaching assistant in a classroom, or I'm sure as a doorman on a one-man door somewhere in the world. It's so important. I think that is the strength of the ICM, this cross-sector ability that we have.
Well, I think there's a kind of the experts in the field with whichever it is, but I think sometimes having the expertise from other sectors kind of going, well, we do things a little bit differently. This is the way we approach things, because I think it's easy to kind of feel blindsided. I definitely see that within some of the other organisations that try and standardise, is they do have quite a blinkered way of looking at things, of our way is right and every other way is wrong. Whereas I think that's one of the benefits, as you say, of that having slightly multidisciplinary kind of approach, that, well, things even within that one sector, they're not always quite as black and white and cut and dry as you think they might be, because, if you're looking at it from within something like the NHS, the people coming in A&E level of that the security team are having to deal with are very different from, a dementia patient on a ward. Suddenly, if you've got that one blinkered view of it, whereas multiple sectors, I mean, we've got some of the board of directors that specialise in more transport orientated and kind of the road work. Then we've got the SIA kind of areas, teaching, health and social care. Airlines, as you mentioned, Phil, is something you do a lot of work with, that have very different needs, requirements, but you never know when something like, obviously I know that you do a lot of work around the mechanical restraint side of things, Phil, and understanding that point. So bringing that in, because you have to on an airline, but then you may have other environments, other sectors going, well, we've never touched mechanical restraints before. Culture is changing, or something's changing, or we've got a new way that we have to do things, and we've never encountered this before. So where do we get our information from? And I think that's where an organisation like the ICM that do have that, that real cross sector of all these different environments, that coming down to that one underpinning management of workplace violence, kind of really comes into play a little bit. As you said, that's one of our main strengths, isn't it? From that diversity as well as from the sector competency.
I mean, the airlines was an interesting one. Again, I don't know whether you remember, but in 1996, the term air rage hit the mainstream media. So the newspapers and the television companies were all, putting stories out there about air rage, violence in the skies, and other headlines. And the Civil Aviation Authority made disruptive passenger training mandatory for UK registered airlines. We just happened to have been working with the airlines for about 6 months when all this happened. So again, a bit of luck. I know you say you make your own luck, but we picked the airlines out as a particular place where training could be necessary, and then managed to get six UK registered airlines to work with us to put together a pilot course. That's a bit of a pun, pilot course, but to put a pilot course together for crew on how to deal with potentially disruptive passengers on board aircraft. And funnily enough, the first thing we suggested was that you don't get involved in restraint, because the environment is not suited to restraining somebody. Having worked in maximum secure prisons, less secure prisons than maximum secure prisons, and then in secure psychiatric units, I've had my fair share of frontline restraints and understood the complexities of that and the difficulties that involves. When you move that into the environment of an aircraft, it becomes even more difficult to achieve. I mean, even basic rules about body language and stance and positioning just go out the window. So we to really look at everything we'd been teaching to try and make it work in that environment. And then after about a year, the airlines came back to us and said, look, the conflict management, the de-escalation stuff is fantastic. But ultimately, when somebody won't calm down for whatever reason, and it's usually alcohol or some other substance that's behind it, then they said, if we have to divert, it's going to cost us upwards of £50,000. We'd much rather be able to contain that situation until we can push on to the intended destination. So we looked at how we could put together a restraint program that would be suited to that environment, and I think that's and I think you can transfer that into other sectors. If you're dealing with young people, I know all three of us work in young person settings, and your approach to restraining a young person can be different to restraining a fully grown, strong adult. It's just a different set of skills. And I think I think that's where that sector development work is essential. But you don't want to miss out on something that another sector could add to that development process, because there's been some good work done, in different sectors. And to me, anyway, it makes sense to share that learning.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, isn't it? When you're most people who are coming in, as far as the training organisation is concerned, they've obviously worked within some frontline, more than likely, worked in some level of frontline, whatever that sector is. Then they kind of go into, I like teaching, or I like sharing this information, so maybe I'll go out freelance, start a company, whatever it is. But as you just said there, all of your theoretical knowledge around things like proxemics, suddenly you're on a plane, well, that's out the window. So It's a case of, well, what tools do I have now? And if you've only got the kind of your personal experience and the textbooks, so to speak, to kind of call upon, you're obviously then not teaching stuff that is going to be applicable and purposeful for the actual environment and for the setting. So that's where, having access to organisations like the Institute of Conflict Management and groups like this, and obviously I know our hope is to start putting out more content and information and improving what we do to allow people to have more access to that. But also it's a community of people to go in, Phil does a lot of that, maybe I can pick his brains about this, or Gerard does a lot in schools, maybe I can pick his brains, because I find that quite nice about the ICM, that although we are all independent business owners trying to develop what we do, we also have quite a strong sense of community going, look, this is a hard business to be in, it's highly competitive, but there's enough work for everybody if we can educate the sectors properly. It's probably one of the biggest things, isn't it? So if more people realise the benefit of training and how it could actually then save them money long term through improved staff retention, lower incidence rates and stuff like that, there's plenty of work for everybody to go around. So actually, if everybody's teaching and sharing the knowledge and good practice, well, hopefully that'll build the sector confidence within the training that they get, rather than kind of destroying it, if that makes sense. Again, there's no point in getting that training in. It costs us money, but we don't see the benefits. So I think that's quite nice as far as sharing that community.
Right. I think, speaking from my own experience with the ICM since about 2017, firstly, just having the standards. If you're a small and growing company, having the standards there to check yourself against, maybe aspire to in some moments where you look at the standards and think, gosh, we could do better there. That's been really effective. And then secondly, that point that you made about having people who've been down that path before, or they've encountered those tactical, problems before. And I've always found that the group's been really open to sharing, and I think that's because everybody's pretty much of a one mind, which is we need to provide the best quality training to the people on the front line as we can. And, commercial interests or some idea about being secretive about our methodologies is probably not going to to improve the sector as fast as we all want it to improve. We all want people to get the best information, don't we?
Yeah.
I guess that's where we're headed.
I mean, there's an awful lot of cloak and dagger mentality to particularly physical skill sets in the early days, because nobody wanted to give away that skill set, and people were very protective of it. But there are only so many ways you can, disengage from a hold or a grip. There are only so many ways you can do it. There are only so many ways you can hold the upper limb.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if that information is shared, which I think the Institute did manage to crack that nut. It got those 67 inaugural members and the other people that joined thereafter. It gave them the confidence to share ideas because they were gaining something as well.
Yeah.
They met that, well, we use this, and then suddenly somebody said, well, there's these other versions as well.
Yeah.
And if you know all the different versions, then when you go into a setting where you're putting together a training program for that group of employees that are having to work in that environment with those service users that show these kinds of, or have a proclivity to certain behaviours, then you can choose from your toolbox the skills that are best suited to that environment and that particular problem, which can only be a good thing. And I think I think when people started to realise that, okay, they were putting something in the hat, but they could also get other stuff out of the hat as well.
I think there's a really interesting historical perspective on that, which is, I think, Phil, you're describing the 90s, and I think, during the maybe the decade previous to that, there was this moment where the methods that the Home Office were approving to use within certain settings were starting to come out into other settings. So we had some stuff coming out into education, aided by a big company that was offering those skills to the schools. And then we had other companies emerging in different parts of the country that were starting to allow or offer those skill sets into children's care, which is a big area for that. And then the NHS had its own, big organizations that were serving that market. But ultimately, it all came from a fairly limited set of sources, and I think that bred that sort of secret society, secret information kind of mindset that was around back then. But we're in a very different place now.
Oh yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, well, there's so much access to information, isn't there, that it's very unlikely that any training organization is going to develop, I've developed a single finger safe restraint system where I can basically hold any person with only a single member of staff using one finger and there's no risk of harm to anybody. It doesn't exist. So as you said, Phil, there's only so many ways to hold people's arms and legs. And I think it's that kind of almost analogy, isn't it? If as primitive man, we all knew how to walk, but I secretly discovered running, and then went, well, I'm keeping this to myself, though. Then kind of we wouldn't benefit as a society. It wouldn't be worthwhile. So it's exactly the same thing, isn't it? Going if we genuinely care, and I think most of us who do this job, yes, it is a commercial enterprise, but I think we genuinely have a passion for what we do as far as, improving the well-being of staff, those we support. But also that's important to us as far as building our brand and building our training anyway. So if, as you said, if there's a technique that actually that maybe is simpler than the one I had, or maybe it's more effective than the one I had, or it would be more suitable for that particular person than the one we've got, well, that's beneficial to share and receive. As you say, a good analogy, putting it in the hat as well as taking it out the hat. So
yeah, I think that's an interesting question, maybe for a future round table. Is just how well our customers know what they're buying is interesting, because I think the debates about whether one type of hold, Phil, versus another, and I know that's been earmarked for a roundtable discussion in the future. Really, I think that those are discussions amongst the trainers and the experts behind the scenes, and they're very valuable. But I think ultimately our customers often don't understand the technical differences between the various holds and so on. And I know one of my mentors, Gary Klugowitz, always says, defensive tactics are a matter of opinion. And for that, so I think when we all get together, we have those discussions and conversations. but ultimately our customers don't really know the differences. It, while it's important, I think there are other ways to differentiate. That was my second point. Between all the companies, you had 67 in the room back in the day, Phil, there's many other ways to differentiate your training provision, your training service, than trying to show Andy's special one finger technique.
I might have developed that and you guys got no idea, and I'm secretly keeping it in my back pocket, ready for one day taking over the market completely. So I'll sell it to you for a nominal fee.
Let's get on a call after this one. But I think that once you realize that there are many other ways to differentiate your service to your customers than simply having a different technique here or there, it makes the sharing of that information then much easier and much smoother across the different providers.
And the more solutions you can offer has got to widen your potential customer base.
It's true.
You know, the skill set we teach for restraining a violent person on an aircraft, and we do work with helicopter crews as well, where you've two people in the back and two in the front. Now the two in the front of the helicopter can't get involved for obvious reasons, and the two in the back have to stop the violent person getting to the two people in the front, otherwise they're all in the front line. So you know the skill set is a much higher bar than you would teach in a care setting,
yes,
or in a children's setting. I mean, when I transitioned from the prison service out into psychiatric care, the very first thing I was asked to do to deliver, training-wise, was a full 5-day control and restraint course to a group of staff that were setting up a new unit at the hospital where I worked. And everybody was petrified of going through this control and restraint training because some of them had experienced it before and managed to convince the rest of the group that they were going to get tied in knots for 5 days. And by that time, I'd been working within the hospital with the patients that were then service users, we might call them now, and the staff for a period of about 6 months. And I just said to the unit manager and to the staff that had come to do the training, you don't need CNR. It doesn't fit this environment. It's too severe a training model for this environment. So I was up to see the hospital director straight away, who'd employed me as a Home Office approved CNR trainer to deliver that training to their staff. And I said, it's too much. I wouldn't be comfortable doing a 3-person arrowhead formation restraint team training to people that are working with people that that would just be too much. So for 2 years then I was sent by the hospital to everywhere that was delivering training. Like you said, Gerard, most of it had come from the same source.
Yes.
I did Broadmoor, Ashworth, Rampton, St Andrews, in various places, and they were all teaching a version of control and restraint. In fact, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the big hospitals at the time called it care and responsibility. So they could still call it CNR training, but they could soften the title.
Sectors love to do that. How can we make this sound more fluffy, just to make people happy? Yeah.
Marketing straplines.
I took everything I saw, including they got some. By then there were some commercial organisations on the scene, which they brought into the hospital, and I took and I absorbed all that information. I learned holes that weren't pain compliant. I saw different methods of doing things. And in the end, the hospital asked me to put a programme together designed to meet the needs of the hospital itself, which is what I did. And the hospital instantly got a lot of interest from other agencies that were using, that were coming in and viewing the training, which
they were lucky to have you, Phil. I mean, that sort of disruptive mindset, kind of like we're not going to do it the way we've always done it, or we need to change it so that it's more appropriate. I think we still have issues with that in the sector, if I'm honest. Like we still see, I've been doing a lot of work with trainers over the last couple of years, and we still see quite a rigid mentality to this is approved, or this is the way we've always done it, or this is safe. Yeah. And not enough people looking at that sideways or thinking we could change it, we could make adjustments here to make it better.
Drawing your information from one well. If your experience, your knowledge base is from one particular sector or experience that you've had as a trainer. You're missing all the rest of that knowledge, which may or may not be of use to you in the sector or sectors that you're working in. But what a fantastic thing to be able to call on.
Mm.
All that background of information and knowledge and skills.
I'm a
And
big
that's
believer as well. I'm a big believer as well that
why the
sorry,
ICM was
Phil.
formed.
I'm a big believer as well, Phil, in both of you. That competition is never a bad thing because competition drives you to be better. That you look around and going, "Hey, they're doing things really well, so why aren't I doing that?" And that's where, as you said earlier, Gerard, the standards at least hold you accountable to something to kind of go, "Yeah, there's areas in there that I can improve, I can tweak, and stuff like that." So. Yeah, I always think competition is quite a good thing. Glad I have competitors. Forces me to be better at what I do. So, also, we're drawing to sort of close on our first round table, but obviously we've kind of talked a bit about the history there, and thank you so much for sharing the journey that you kind of took, that Gerard and I just recently jumped on the bandwagon of, really. But obviously the ICM's been through some ups and downs over the years, and we're kind of turning things around and getting back into the sector and really getting our hooks into the kind of the sector again. Laying our place kind of thing. I know we've got some exciting new things going on. One, obviously, these round tables, and there will be different members of the board that engage in these round tables over the different months. Some, as we've spoken about, from different sectors, and we'll look at some topic specific areas. Sounds like we've definitely got one on Phil's opinion on techniques, the controversy. And so it'd be good to have that one to get people's opinions, because again, it's everybody's going to have those opinions. So what are the big plans, the other plans that the ICM has got coming that people should maybe be aware of?
Okay, so the latest news, I suppose, is the relationship that we've developed with UCAS, standards for using those national occupational standards as a base to provide standards for training providers, because the national occupational standards are more about employers and what employers should be putting in place to protect the workforce from work-related violence. But the ICM's focus, because it's a trainers organisation at the end of the day, is around standards for training providers.
Yeah.
And we've formed a relationship with UCAS to create some cross-sector standards for delivering training in the prevention and management of work-related violence. Hopefully, we'll be able to launch to the membership within the next 12-18 months with a favourable wind. We're at the draft stage with the standards themselves and the guidance for the people that are going to use those standards. The board's as strong as it's been in a long while. With a good membership of the board at the moment, and importantly, an active membership. The fact that you wanted to put this together, Andy, and you and Gerard wanted to begin these round tables. I think it's a fantastic thing. We used to have open forums that members could attend, which again was a great arena for exchanging ideas and thoughts and getting some cross-sector input into whatever the topic was that we were discussing. Technology's moved on, and you can do it this way these days, and we can share this on the same technology for the members. So yeah, it's exciting times for the ICM, even after all these years.
I think one of the things that I find quite exciting that we're kind of working towards as well is bringing something that we had before, bringing it back, which is the PASS award as well. I know that's something you're quite excited about, Gerard, isn't it? As far as something you've always intrigued by it, but it's not been really made available particularly.
I think you mentioned it quite a bit, I think. I think maybe I was one of the most recent people to go through the PASS award. It's a few years ago now, but I found the process really helpful for me personally, and it's nice to be recognized, So I think in the market, in the sector, whereas, as Phil's just mentioned, Andy, people can go to a particular training provider and be certificated as a trainer. That's just the one well, to use Phil's analogy there. And I think to go in front of a panel of your peers,
Mm.
experienced people in the sector, maybe teaching in different sectors as well, and to go through a process whereby they check you out as a trainer, as a practical skills trainer. How do you achieve learning in the classroom? What are your skills? How do you engage with learners? How do you create that environment? That's I think that has great value. I don't think there's anything else in existence that helps people to do that from an independent point of view. Um, that specifically looks at the trainer's skill level and their understanding and that deep background knowledge that, again, you both alluded to in this conversation today, that helps people to create solutions that actually work and are appropriate for certain workplaces. And I think the PASTA award, for me, offers us that opportunity at the ICM to help trainers to really be recognized as specialists. So it's one I always bang on about. And, I'm looking forward to getting our first sort of cadre through that.
When the ICM launched it, it was a very popular award, the Practical Skills Trainers Award, PASTA. For that reason, it was recognition by your peers, not because you'd paid the money and got a certificate at the end of the 3-5 day course or whatever. It was recognition by your peers that you were competent to teach practical skills in a safe and effective way.
So for me, just on the back of that, for me, it was collating some documentary evidence about what I was doing. And then I met in person with 2 members of the panel, and we sat for 2 hours. I quite clearly remember sitting, answering questions and doing demonstrations and explaining myself for 2 full hours before the panel was satisfied. And at the end, they commended me. So it wasn't a difficult 2 hours, but it was definitely 2 full hours.
Yeah.
So it was a rigorous process too, Phil, and I think very valuable. Once we get it up and running again, we get some people to come through.
And I say the ideal from all of these, the UCAS obviously standards, as well as the PASTA award, is that our centres or the trainers that are kind of registered with, that overall the other side of that is the customers are kind of saying, hey, these guys haven't just got a certificate, they've gone through something quite rigorous and they are considered to be credible within their field, across the board, cross sector as well. So it adds that additional credibility. And I think the access we have to all the different information, again, it's that educating the customers on the other end, isn't it? That the benefit of being part of the ICM, as far as isn't this kind of niche market, this is kind of cover all these different sectors, and in all the different realms of conflict management, all the way up to physical intervention skills, and beyond, as far as mechanical skills are concerned, etc. Yeah, fantastic, guys. So obviously we're drawing to a close on our first round table. Did either of you have anything else you wanted to add in, or anything else that you wanted to raise, or we can always save it for another round table? You both all good?
I think if you're involved in training in this particular field, and I'll say field because it is cross-sector, whether you're focusing on a specific sector or a couple of specific sectors that are closely linked, or whether you're working across a few sectors where the training can differ vastly, either way, from my perspective, it can't harm you to surround yourself with people that have knowledge that they can share with you, which as I say, was ultimately the aim of the ICM, was to get training providers to share information.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think one important bit is being part of the ICM, but maintaining your independence, I think is still allowing you to maintain your autonomy over your company and what you feel is right and wrong to teach, as long as it's meeting these occupational standards that are just across the board. Then you've got that own freedom to kind of be able to deliver the course in the way that you want, in the kind of the way that you feel is best, which I think is, something that's sometimes taken away in certain areas of the sector, to kind of, you lose that autonomy of your company, as you said, that differential between what makes you a great provider, that allows that freedom, doesn't it, with the ICM?
I think the interesting side note there, I know we're finishing up, is that the ICM has membership from internal training teams too, so it's not all commercial training providers.
Yeah.
I recently spoke with a team whose commercial training provider has stopped providing physical intervention trainer certification for them.
Mm.
So they feel like they've had the umbrella pulled out from over them, let's say, and so they're looking to what can they do, and I
Mm.
think the ICM is a natural home for a high quality internal training team
Yeah.
to evidence that they're doing things, according to standardized quality assurance processes and all of that. So I think I always find that's really interesting, and I think it's a good move for an internal training team to look
Mm.
at standardization and certification as well.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I've got nothing
Nice.
else though, Andy. That's me for today.
Nice addition there at the end there,
I'll
Gerald. That's
save
perfect. Thank
save
you
a
very
couple of things
much.
for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, both of you, for obviously joining me on today's roundtable. We will be looking to run these every month. If you have found this useful, interesting, you would like to find out more, then obviously pop comments or share and follow. And then we'll make sure we put a link in the description to the ICM website if you'd like to contact us and have any questions about what we do. But otherwise, thanks for listening, and thank you both for joining me today.
Steve
Thanks,
Watson.
Andy.